Look, we have like 40 movies and shows to talk about today, so no nonsense. I'm going to tell you guys why I believe Morbius is the greatest movie of all time. What is up, Flick fans? Welcome back to my channel. Nope, it's not Morbin time. It's time to redo my Marvel Cinematic Universe tier list and incorporate all of the changes that I have, and I have a lot of changes. So you guys stick around because we're going to rank everything at the end of the video, but I'm going to tell you guys why I put these movies and TV shows on specific tiers, and I'm not going to lie to you. Unless the studio pays me to. Cha-ching, let's go. Send in that check, anyone who wants to. But Disney, don't pay me in money. Pay me in those Little Debbie gingerbread men. They just brought those back. I found them at my local Kroger. Delicious.
That sounds pretty good, doesn't it, Scoop? Rah!
You're still here and you can ignore my nonsense. The best way to support this channel is to like the video. The second best way is to leave a comment. The third best way is to, I don't know. You can subscribe. That would help the numbers. Boy, we got to boost those. Okay. I've done this 1,000 times. Going to try to condense them this time around. Iron Man. Really, we're going to start with the entire trilogy. 1, 2, and 3. Let's start with the first. The first Iron Man is as brilliant as I remember. You go back and you watch the movies like it hasn't aged a day since first watching it back in 2008. It feels so grounded, yet you see shades of what the MCU turns into. For the most part, a lot of people involved with this movie you have to thank for what the MCU turned into. Jon Favreau, obviously, but then Robert Downey Jr., man, just setting the stage for what was to come, and the way that this movie got off the ground and worked after production, that if you guys don't know this, people didn't think the movie was going to be all that good, so the fact that it was good and it set the stage for the MCU, it's awesome, and that's why I have to put Iron Man on the awesome tier once again. No surprises or changes there. Iron Man 2, a massive step down in terms of quality compared to the first. Now, I'm not saying you can't go have fun with Iron Man 2. That's kind of the vibe that I get every time I go back and I watch it. I'm like, oh, it's enjoyable. You have Don Cheadle. He's taking over the role of Rhodey. You have mixing in a few villains that don't really flow all that well, right? Whiplash, what a disappointment. You set the stage for something awesome, and you get one sort of payoff. That first fight scene on the raceway, man, that was really cool, but the way he played out in the third act, just a waste of a character. Justin Hammer was great, but they didn't use him enough. I want to see more of him in the MCU. So again, some really good things in there, but it felt like just the in-between movie to get us to the Avengers, and they also had to shoehorn like 5 things about the Avengers in there. I'm going to put Iron Man 2 on the meh tier. It could be a fun time, but when you look at the story, it's a bit of a mess. Iron Man 3, this is one that I'm always just kind of flip-flopping on. I'm always flip-flopping. Okay tier, good tier. Okay tier, good tier. There are really good things in here. I like that you're stripping away everything that makes Iron Man, except for the brain of Tony Stark. So you really get to see kind of this character study and the stress that comes from what he had to endure in the other movies and kind of dealing with PTSD in there. And then this young character comes along, a character that a lot of people forgot about because he shows up at the funeral and everybody's like, who's that kid? Iron Man 3 is a solid enough time. Where it starts to fall apart is when you get into the whole Mandarin thing, and Kingsley's version and then Guy Pearce's version, none of which end up being the actual Mandarin. Now, I do think Ben Kingsley's character has kind of been redeemed since Shang Chi, but Guy Pearce, man, I like the build-up, but the payoff was weak, and what they did with Pepper and the fact that they just kind of forget about all that. I mean, Pepper, she turned into this raging magma monster, and it's just never mentioned again. I'm like, oh, that's a weird thing to forget about. So a lot of things in this movie that I don't know if even Marvel was happy with, but I do believe it's entertaining enough. I'm going okay tier for Iron Man 3. We're going from Iron Man to what a lot of people call Iron Man Jr., Spider-Man, and the trilogy, which ends up being one big origin story for the Spider-Man that we know thanks to No Way Home. But we have to start with Homecoming, and Homecoming is just... it's a fun coming-of-age story with a lot of humor in there. Everybody's going to make that John Hughes comparison, Ferris Bueller. There's even a Ferris Bueller reference in there. That made me happy. I really like Tom Holland in this movie. I really like Tom Holland in general as this character. He's a nice mix of Andrew and Tobey Spider-Man, but also feels much more comic accurate, even though the movies that he's in aren't. as comic accurate. So finding that balance is a tough task. I like Vulture as a villain. Again, the standout scenes with him, most of those come from Michael Keaton's performance. Now, were there amazing action sequences? Not really. Is Shocker or the Shockers wasted? Yeah, they were. But I think there are really great things in Spider-Man Homecoming, and that's why I'm putting it on the great tier. And it's funny. It's really, really funny. It made me laugh all the way through. Spider-Man Far From Home isn't as funny. It just doesn't have the humor that the first movie had. It didn't capture everything the first movie had going for it with that coming-of-age aspect. What Far From Home does really well is it focuses more on Peter, and I believe his development here and the depth that comes from his character is better and greater than what it was in Homecoming. Now, again, the humor, not as good. But I like Peter more in this movie. I absolutely love Jake Gyllenhaal as villain. And MJ's better, right? MJ was a weakling for me in the first film. I just didn't really like the vibe, didn't like the personality, thought the chemistry was not there. All of that is present in this film. It's slowly getting better and culminating into what we get in the third film, and that's why I'm going to put Far From Home on the great tier. Not everybody liked the twist, but I like the twist. No Way Home. That's a movie that I just like everything about. It's really, really fun. Like, it's so much fun to watch. Now, before you get all the cameos, and I've seen a lot of people say this, hey, Austin, it's a cameo fest. What's the point? Just the cameos, and I disagree. Now, would I have been pissed if they weren't in the film? Absolutely. I knew they were in it. But even me not knowing that, I probably would have been pissed. Regardless, we still got a really good story before that. Now you're shoehorning in the villain storyline. They shot it during COVID, so the Sandman and Lizard thing are awkward. You get some one-liners that don't entirely add up. But this is a story focused on Peter and Peter's journey and Peter having to deal with all of these villains in his universe and that camaraderie between he and the other Spider-Men. It spawns from what he has to go through at the beginning of the film, and then throw in Willem Dafoe as just one of the best MCU villains ever, and then overarching Marvel villains ever, and you have a kick-ass movie that, you know, gets even better in the third act when Toby and Andrew come in. Your fans are losing their minds, and I'm sitting in the theater just like, oh my God. Yeah, you know where this is going. It's going on the awesome tier. Next up, we have Thor, a non-divisive quadrilogy, because everyone agrees on all four movies. Thor, a compelling origin story, a movie that I believe is just a little underrated in the series. It's not great, right? You know, Kenneth Branagh, he likes to use the Dutch angles. There are some things in here that don't necessarily hold up all that well. The Destroyer, was that its name? I think that's what it was called. It was a waste of space, a waste of time. But Thor and Loki, Thor and Jane, Thor on Earth, a fish out of water. Some really good things in here in terms of the humor. And then you go into Asgard, which is beautifully conveyed to us in this movie, by the way. And you get Loki kind of struggling with where he fits into this universe. And I think all of those things are handled really well in that first Thor movie. I believe this is a good film, a good experience. And then we get into Thor: The Dark World. And you know, I've always said this isn't the worst comic book movie of all time. It's not a movie that makes you angry while watching like some of these other MCU films and like some of these other just crappy Marvel movies, except for Morbius. That's, again, the greatest film of all time. This is one of those movies that you're like, why am I watching this? It's so dull. It's so dull to the point to where I'm starting to lean in the direction of this being a bad movie, even though, again, and I gotta say it's terrible, but I watch it, and the only thing that grabs me about this film, the only thing is the camaraderie between Loki and Thor. I don't give a rip about anything else. The Infinity Stone in this movie, I don't care about. Thor and Jane's relationship, I don't care about. The random guy that joins them on their journey and just, what was that about? And then Malekith, the elf, the half elf, half elf, double elf, double quick. You need it fast, with just a trick. You get it on the double quick. I guess the portal battle was kind of cool. This movie's bad. I'm sorry. I have to put it on the bad tier. It gets worse with age. Thor Ragnarok, a movie that actually, it gets better with age. The more I think about Thor Ragnarok and what it was able to do for the Thor franchise, for the Thor character. It's that spark, that rejuvenation that a character like Thor needs. It gives him more of a personality, makes him more dynamic, and Taika Waititi style, say what you will about Love and Thunder, it works so well in this movie, and the story is really interesting. And you have characters that you really care about, like a Loki and a Hulk. So many inclusions that worked in this film's favor. And of course, that main action scene at the end that is absolutely awesome, as is this movie. That's why it goes on the awesome tier. Thor, Love, and Thunder. Look, there's some great emotion here. There's no denying that. I feel like Jane Foster and what they did for her character worked really well. It's a relationship that I never really cared about until this film. What got me with this movie, what made me appreciate it more, not more, I've liked it less and less, but what made me appreciate aspects of it more is looking at it through Korg's perspective and the fact that he's telling the story, and the way he's telling it leads you to believe that he's taking some liberties with that story. So seeing it through his perspective and watching the movie like that, that's kind of interesting. Now, did I need so much more from Gore the God Butcher? Yes, Bale's performance is great, but where's the butchering of the gods? I needed some god butchering here. I also needed way less of this over-the-top and ridiculous and the humor that makes it feel like more of a parody of Thor Ragnarok than an actual film that stands alone with a very interesting plot, right? There are moments that work so well in its favor, right? The planet scene is incredible. The black and white is awesome. The scene with eternity at the end, but a lot of those things surrounding it and the screaming goats, I hate it so much. I hated it. I hated it. That being said, I don't have this strong hatred for the movie that a lot of people have. That's why I'm putting Love and Thunder on the okay tier. Austin! No! It's my list. I will do what I want and get paid at will. Chuck the money out, baby. Here it comes. The Avengers movies, man, these are easy. These have really never changed tiers. Now, have they changed the order in which I rank them? Absolutely, right? When it all started and I first watched Infinity War and Endgame, I'm like, okay, the first Avengers, it may still be just as good, if not better, but Infinity War and Endgame, they age like a fine wine, and Endgame, that feeling that you have after watching, you're like on cloud nine, nothing can ever top this, till you go back and watch Infinity War again, you realize that this is not only a beautifully constructed story from a narrative standpoint, not even looking at this as a comic book movie, man, this is through the eyes of our villain. It's through his perspective. Then when you join our heroes, you can feel the pain, the emotion, the turmoil of the situation and what Tony Stark does in this film, and then the inclusion of all these characters. You get, pieces of Captain America and Black Panther, and then obviously what happens at the end with the snap is one of the most integral and pivotal moments of any franchise in history, and the way this movie handles it is amazing. Talking about Infinity War, my only big issue with Infinity War is the cannon fodder that they fight at the end. It's another big battle between our heroes and a bunch of creatures and a lot of CGI creatures, and then Mark Ruffalo's green screen and the big Iron Man suit. It just looks bad. It looks really bad. But the movie Infinity War may just be the best of the best when it comes to the Avengers. Endgame is long, and each act feels like its own distinct thing. At the beginning, you get the build-up, then you get the time travel, then you get the big confrontation with Thanos, featuring some of the greatest moments of all time within the MCU. But all of this comes after the first two Avengers movies that set the stage for what this is and what these two films could do, right? Age of Ultron, maybe not as good as that first Avengers. I do feel like Age of Ultron gets slept on because, there are things in it that just don't work as well, but Ultron's still a compelling villain, very reminiscent of the third act of the first, but they're dealing with different things. Feels like our heroes are a bit more desperate in this movie, so Age of Ultron has a lot going for it. It also has some things going up against it, repetitive formula and, character situations that don't always work and a little weird romance going on in there. So I don't quite love Age of Ultron as much as that first Avengers that featured, again, some of the most iconic moments of my life. As a wannabe nerd who grew up reading comics and loving superheroes and seeing those pages come to life in that first Avengers and seeing the way that Joss Whedon handled this, right? We give him flack for Justice League, rightfully so. But he handled these first two Avengers movies with care. So I think I've talked enough. I want to put these on tiers. We're going to go the awesome tier for the first Avengers. The good tier for Age of Ultron. Again, a step down, but it still works. Infinity War and Endgame, those are all-timers. Those go on the all-time tier for sure. Ant-Man and Ant-Man and the Wasp. Ant-Man is one of those movies that I feel like is slept on in the MCU. It's the perfect balance of humor, awkwardness, and the idea that this guy shouldn't really be here, shouldn't really be a part of the Avengers. I mean, he's not part of it yet, but this guy, Scott Lang, he works at Baskin Robbins. I mean, he's a criminal, for goodness sakes. But he's not really, he has a heart. He has a heart of gold, and that heart shines through in this first film. And you can tell how smart he is. That was one of the issues that I had with Ant-Man and the Wasp, is they give him the Buzz Lightyear in Toy Story 4 treatment, right? Buzz Lightyear in Toy Story 4, he's kind of an idiot, and it stinks, because he was silly, but not as big of an idiot in the other movies. In Ant-Man and the Wasp, Scott Lang is an idiot, but he's not an idiot. He's actually really smart. You see shades of it, but I just don't like the way that they wrote him into his own story in the sequel. Wasp is great. She's always been a good character, the way that she develops in the first Ant-Man, and then obviously taking the mantle in the second movie. And you have an amazing cast. The way that they all work off of each other, introducing Michelle Pfeiffer in the second film, and hopefully they're going to take these characters in very interesting directions in the next movie. I'm so excited to see what they do with this specific franchise, because it's always been one that's warmed my heart. Even though I don't love Ant-Man and the Wasp, I think it tries too hard. It tries too hard to replicate the ridiculous formula of the first that felt like lightning in a bottle. Even Yellow Jacket, I don't think is the worst villain. Ghost is a forgettable villain. Lawrence Fishburne's in this movie. I always forget. That's not a good sign. His character is very forgettable. And, you have that big car chase at the end. And the lack of a compelling villain, Walton Goggins. What was the point of that entire storyline? It's ridiculous, and not in a funny way. Now, the second movie is still funny. I believe the second movie works so much better with its humor than something like Thor: Love and Thunder. But I also believe it's just as messy and uncompelling as a movie like Love and Thunder, which is why we're going to go ahead and start with the second movie and put that on the okay tier next to Love and Thunder. But the first Ant-Man, again, knocks all of those little elements out of the park. That's why I'm going great tier. That's right, Ant-Man's underrated. Stop picking on the little guy. Guardians of the Galaxy, not much needs to be said with these two films. James Gunn, reinventing what we knew about the MCU with brand new characters that not a lot of people had heard of. And I haven't even, prior to that first film, really been able to dive into the Guardians of the Galaxy comics. So some of these characters were brand new to me. Like some of these I'm like, who is this guy? This dude is awesome. I knew of Rocket Raccoon, but now he's one of my favorites. I knew of Groot. Had no clue Vin Diesel saying 3 words would knock it out of the park like he did. I truly believe Chris Pratt is great as Star-Lord. I love Gamora. I love Drax. So the first film, giving us exactly who these characters were, conveying it beautifully, nice balance of humor, amazing soundtrack. I do believe the villain could have been better, but everything about these characters and the fact that the focus is really on the heroes makes that villain issue, not a huge issue. He's fine, but makes it not that big of a deal, which is why I'm going to go ahead and put Guardians of the Galaxy on the awesome tier. And then you have the sequel, Volume 2, that just continues to get better and better every time I watch it. The first time I watched it, I didn't love how, again, with the sequels feeling like parodies of the first movie, it tried too hard with its humor. The jokes that continue throughout the movie, and they weren't funny the first time, they weren't funny the 50th time. Drax doesn't get a lot to do as a character. There are some things that are just forgotten about in their entirety. But you know what it does too? It gets you emotional. Makes you feel good while you're watching it. It is still a compelling story. It has compelling moments, and the soundtrack continues to be as good as it was in the first film. Gunn's direction is maybe better here. I don't like the story as much. I don't like the script as much, but his direction is incredible because he knocks the emotions out of the park. I'm going to put Guardians Volume 2. You know what? I'm actually going to pivot. I was going to go good tier. I'm going to pivot and go great tier, and now we go into Doctor Strange. We've talked Doctor Strange. We've talked Multiverse of Madness. The first film was Scott Derrickson. It had just enough wackiness in it, but it kept it really grounded, and it had the horror, but just enough of it. It had the shades of what we love about Doctor Strange in the comics. Weak villain. And I mean, the villain played by the incredible Mads Mikkelsen, could have been so much better. And if he would have been so much better, this could be a top 5 MCU movie. I'm not kidding. Doctor Strange and his origin story, they are that compelling in this film. And just the way that it's handled, the way that it, trips you out as you're watching, it's incredible. It really is. The villain stinks. But everything else is so great in this film, I am willing to overlook that and put it on the great tier. And then you have a sequel directed by Sam Raimi that does feel distinctly different from the first movie. And I mean the score, the look, the feel, Sam Raimi's direction. But Marvel let Sam Raimi, he had his playground. He was able to play around. He was able to do some things that I never thought I would see in an MCU movie. And I dug it. I dug his style. I dug what he was able to do for Doctor Strange as a character. Give him this, arc, this emotion that I felt in the first film, but I felt it so much more in this movie. So the romantic aspect, so much better. You have Wanda, and I think Wanda's a great villain. I've heard a lot of people, somebody commented the other day and said, Austin, Wanda sucks in that movie. And I'm like, you are wrong, sir. She's a great villain. I like her motivations. It is rushed. The storyline is rushed. I felt like we could have spent so much more time building that up and, delivering on a better explanation of, obviously we have the Darkhold and people should know they have the Darkhold, but it wasn't very well explained to us as an audience at the beginning of the movie. Regardless, Raimi's style carries through. I think the biggest issue is the name. Why is this called Multiverse of Madness? We go to like 3 universes and spend time in one of them for most of the movie. You have the cameo scenes. It's cool to see Krasinski. It's cool to see these characters. Did they serve a huge purpose? Not necessarily, so maybe that is my biggest flaw with the movie, but I still think it's good. I'm putting Multiverse of Madness on the good tier. WandaVision. I really enjoy WandaVision. I actually believe WandaVision was the perfect way to set the stage for what Phase 4 kind of was, should have been more of, and that's different projects, because WandaVision's different. Every single week, I was blown away by the creativity. The beginning of the season, when you have those episodes diving in, and this is something that a lot of people didn't love. My best friend, he's like, I hate this. What is this? That's fine. I thought it was creative. I thought it was a great way to go about it. I do believe the finale is a little more generic than it should have been. I thought the finale had the potential to pay off on one of the greatest MCU projects of all time. Unfortunately, you have the Ralph Boner joke, you have the cliche, the pew pew, pew 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 pew, and they're in the air and they're doing the pew pew. Didn't love that, but some really great things, wide vision, what Wanda does, and the path she goes down. All in all, what an awesome series, and I really enjoyed it. Hulk! We have a Hulk. We actually have 2 Hulks. We have the Incredible Hulk and She-Hulk. Vastly different mediocre projects. Vastly different. I mean, you have one that takes itself so seriously, and I mean to the point to where the script really starts to get in the way of enjoyment because the dialogue is so bad in The Incredible Hulk, and I challenge you to go back and watch this movie. I stood by, and I was one of you guys, and I'm talking to the people that like this. I was one of you. I stood by this film. I said, it's actually underrated. It's actually pretty good. It's pretty entertaining. And then, like 5 years later, a couple months ago, I went back and rewatched it, and I was like, I can't sit and complain about some of these Phase 4 scripts, and then look at The Incredible Hulk and say, no, that's a good one. That's a good one. The romantic tension or lack thereof between Edward Norton and those 2 characters, it's awful. It's absolutely awful. And it bogs down a pretty cool story and a pretty cool concept. I love where he is in his life. I love trying to control his anger. Those scenes are cool, but the romance is terrible. And then some of the things they do with the villains. The fight with Abomination saves the experience. It allows me to put this on the meh tier and not the bad tier. It's that good. But the rest of the film is not. She-Hulk. I like what they try to do. And I actually, in the first 2 to 3 episodes, I'm really liking the trajectory. Now, there are some things, while watching those first 2 episodes, I said, okay, if they pay off on this, if they bring back Abomination in an interesting way, and they give us somewhat of a compelling villain, or at least a compelling story that connects, but it doesn't have to connect. I'm okay with the case of the week type thing. Just make the cases interesting. Just make the cases entertaining to the point to where I care. And to the credit of Tatiana Maslany, she kept me in it at points in the show. She's compelling. I like her. I want to see more of her. The show is not. The show didn't work for me. I did not find the episodes to be as interesting as maybe they thought they were. Breaking the fourth wall, those scenes are awkward. The writing itself is just awkward. And I like taking the time to build her up as an individual character in moments. That's good. But you have to give us something that we're either building towards or something that we can look forward to other than the cameos. And I hate the fact that the Daredevil episode was my favorite episode because Daredevil was in it. It's kind of like that Boba Fett thing of, oh, well, I'm watching this not for you, I'm watching this for Daredevil. Well, that's not good. Tatiana Maslany, again, is compelling. I think she makes for a good She-Hulk, but I think She-Hulk and some of the lines in here when she's talking to the Hulk, and I don't know. I didn't like this show. Unfortunately, it didn't work for me. It's going on the bad tier. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier was my most anticipated MCU show, mostly because I love Captain America the Winter Soldier. It's the best. But this show has a villain problem. This show incorporated the Flag Smashers. You could tell there was a lot left on the table there, mostly due to COVID, that whole thing. You can go look at the behind the scenes, why we didn't get more from them, but Carly Morgenthau, was that her name? I remember her name, so that's good. And that storyline stinks, and it really bogs down the rest of the show. A show with some interesting themes that I don't know if they were able to dive into them as much as maybe they wanted to. I like what they do with Falcon. I think Anthony Mackie grows a lot in this show as a character. Taking the mantle, it works really well. His relationship, his camaraderie with Bucky. And then you have John Walker. That side of the story is pretty interesting. Julia Louis-Dreyfus' character, not necessarily. Some things at the end of the finale, not entirely sure. I like the suit reveal. That was cool. Not entirely sure if it paid off on some of the other build-up. And again, Flag Smashers just didn't work as villains. So a lot of underwhelming things about a show with some really good elements. That's why I'm going the okay tier for the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Loki is a show that paid off on my very minor expectations. I wasn't really, I love Tom Hiddleston. I thought the Twilight vibe that this show was giving off at the beginning was pretty cool, but I said, I don't know, man. First two episodes were great. I think it was episode 3, that wasn't very good. There's one episode here that isn't very good. Everything else is amazing. It's top tier MCU. I'm not making that up. The fact that they were able to give it such a heavy sci-fi vibe, not really have to focus on action, not really have to focus on some of the MCU isms, cameos every now and then, but really it's the camaraderie between Loki and Sylvie, and the inclusion of Owen Wilson may just be the best decision they made. And then obviously Kang and that freaking finale that just knocked it out of the park for me. Finally, a Marvel show that had a great finale for an awesome series. What If? I'll keep this short and simple. What If had some really good episodes? What If had some very mediocre episodes? I was so disappointed in the Captain Carter episode because it felt rushed and jumbled, and I was just like, And then the dude Thor, or the Thor-ish episode, I was like, okay, what was that? But then you get the big team up at the end and taking on Ultron. I thought the zombie episode was pretty fun. The best one by far is Doctor Strange, and that had layers, emotion. That made the show worth watching, but it's not a show you have to watch. It's a series with episodes that you should watch, but as a whole, I would say you could skip some of it. That's not the most appealing thing for me, but the episodes that work really well, so I'm going to throw What If on the okay tier right next to Falcon and Winter Soldier. Hawkeye embraces the cheese that it is going for, but it's not overly cheesy in a way that'll have people rolling their eyes. It's more of a show that just gets you in the Christmas spirit, and you're watching it, you're smiling, you're like, finally, Jeremy Renner is getting his chance to really own this role. And he's always been good in the role, but I felt like he was obviously able to thrive here because it's a Hawkeye show. Kate Bishop, that relationship is great. Steinfeld knocks it out of the park, and her camaraderie not only with Clint Barton, but Yelena comes in, man. And, it's one of those, he's going to throw in the cameo as the Black Widow thing. And no, Yelena's great. She was the standout in Black Widow. Her camaraderie with Kate Bishop, that's the standout here. Their scenes, awesome. Hawkeye, awesome. Kingpin's inclusion, I think it could have and should have been better. I thought the finale was fun, but there were some things with Kingpin and other characters who didn't get didn't get the justice that I feel like they deserve. So overall, there were some underwhelming things about it, but I actually really enjoyed Hawkeye. I'm going to throw it on the good tier. Next up, Moon Knight. Man, oh man, Oscar Isaac, one of the best performances in general in the MCU. I'm not joking. The fact that he's able to deliver with these different characters, you have Khonshu, that's an interesting presence. Ethan Hawke gives an awesome performance as a villain, but I felt like his villain was a little underdeveloped, and there were things about him that I just didn't fully, I'm not sure what they were going for in moments, but their dynamic or lack thereof is really good. There's a big twist in there to where you're finally like, okay, this thing is ramping up. It does go a little off the rails. It was off the rails in the beginning. It was off the rails in the end. And the story, there's a lot of detail in there that keeps this show afloat. I don't know if it comes together as well as they want it to, because even with all that detail and the fact that they paid attention so heavily, there are some things about it that just don't really come together, I think, as the showrunners intend. Regardless, I was happy overall with Moon Knight. It did start to turn some things around for me, and Oscar Isaac's performance alone it makes it worth a watch. I mean, you have to watch Moon Knight. It's going on the good tier. Maybe season 2 will be great. Next up, we're talking about the Marvels. It's Miss Marvel and Captain Marvel. One of these days, they're going to have to bring those two together. Maybe that's coming. Kamala Khan is a great character. Iman Vellani knocks it out of the park. Never in a million years would I say Miss Marvel is more compelling than Captain Marvel, but Iman Vellani, she puts that in perspective for me. I'm watching the show going, she's so endearing, and I like her story, and I like that coming-of-age vibe that this show has. A show that started off really, really strong. Now, again, it's one that has a bit of a villain problem. I'm not entirely sure if that aspect works. And then it goes and it explores some things and it starts to go off the rails and veers away from the story that I cared about. And then we come back to the finale and they're rushing to get all these things done. And I'm like, well, if you wouldn't have spent all that time over here, I just don't think Miss Marvel flows as well as they wanted it to. It's definitely a series that had great ideas in place, but didn't fully develop all of them. That being said, it's entertaining because I think the younger characters are fun to watch and they introduce some things. And I actually thought they handled her powers in a way that worked well. They don't look great in the first few episodes, but they're definitely fun, and they work in the finale. So Miss Marvel goes on the okay tier for me. Captain Marvel, less compelling every time I watch it. I just don't love Brie Larson as this character in her own movie. I think Brie Larson's a great actor. She's been nominated for awards. She has given compelling and Oscar-worthy performances. There's just something about the marriage here between her and playing Captain Marvel that doesn't work. It hasn't worked for me yet. Now, it worked better, and people get on to me for saying this, and I don't care. I'm going to keep saying it. I like her more in Endgame than I do in Captain Marvel, and I understand. Look, she is like 4 minutes of screen time. I get it. Do you understand what I'm trying to say here? I just think it's the direction. The Russo brothers' direction is better, and that's why she's better in that movie. Now, there's an opportunity here for growth. I think part of it was the direction. The direction was awkward. It was clunky in Captain Marvel. It's a generic story. It's a cliche story. It's a story that's very unmemorable, but it's one that doesn't do a lot well, So I do have to kind of fault the directors there. This next film is going to have a better opportunity to display what I believe to be Brie Larson's strengths, and that is giving us emotion, allowing her to finally have some chemistry with some characters, and maybe giving her a good villain to fight. Someone that's actually going to bring out of her what we know Captain Marvel can be from the comics, because the villains in the first movie, they just didn't do a lot. As you can tell, I've died down on Captain Marvel. I really have. I'm putting it on the bad tier. I don't like it. Was Eternal something that should have been better than it was? Absolutely. Was the story structure something that took away from the movie as a whole? Yes. The structure is not great. And that's why I think a lot of people found confusion. Knowing who these characters are and kind of where their journeys intersected, I didn't have a huge issue with it, but the more I watch the movie, the more I can understand the fault, even though, again, it's not a huge fault of mine. What I have a big issue with in this movie is the lack of memorable and integral moments in the grand scheme of what the universe is, moments that aren't as impactful as they should have been, and characters that don't resonate with you as heavily as other characters that we've come to know. It feels like a DC movie more than a Marvel movie. Eternals just struggles to walk that tightrope of, not incorporating too much of the MCU that we know, but also kind of dipping its toe into those moments that are just like, come on, man, you did that, you're not going to do this. And look, I like the action scene at the end. I think the final 25 minutes of this film, really good. You can see that big twist with Icarus kind of coming, but it didn't really matter. And I think the visuals on this film are stunning. Cinematography, great. I like the use of natural lighting, all of those things. So there are moments in Eternals that work extremely well. There are other moments that just, you don't really remember them. And I think that's the biggest issue, is the hype levels, even for those who love it, have really died down. I'm going okay tier. Black Widow, more like Black Middow. I can't use the same joke twice. That's 3 times. That's 3 times now. Black Widow. It's not terrible. And honestly, I think there are worse things in some of these other movies that are above it. But the fact that it's so bland and unmemorable in points, yet so beautiful and heartwarming. Again, the sisterhood between Black Widow and Yelena is great. I love David Harbour in this movie. So anytime the family is together on screen, it's really good. But then you have the villain. Then you have that third act. And Taskmaster, a character that they just didn't really give any depth to, a very predictable reveal, a series of predictable events at the end, and a film that had been so subtle and small scale, and then all of a sudden it turns into this big explosion fest at the end. What's the point of that? What's the point? Some people will say of this movie, I don't know if the prequel was needed. Maybe if this movie would have come out 5 years ago, 6 years ago, would have been received better. I'm going meh tier. Give me something good to talk about. Shang Chi, thank you. Thank you, God. This movie is so much fun. It is so much fun. I love the fight scenes. I love Simu Liu. I love this cast. And I love the fact that they made the Mandarin, the fake Mandarin from Iron Man 3, better in this film. They made a lot of things better in this film. Now, I watched it the first time, and I'm watching that third act going, it's a little too, it's big, it's the CGI and the special effects and the dragon, it's a little too off the rails. And then I watched it again, and I'm like, what am I talking about? This is maybe the best part of the movie. It's the most fun part of the movie. And then the third time I watched it, it got better. And the more I watch it, the more I appreciate the choreography. I appreciate the fact that it's a good villain. The Mandarin is now the Mandarin. And that's really cool. And Shang-Chi is just, it's a good character, right? And it's not a performance that's going to knock your socks off, but he's compelling. You like him. He's a likable guy. He has charisma. But the character itself is not why you watch this movie. You watch this movie for all of the things about it that work so well. And that's why I'm completely fine with Destin Daniel Cretton handling a film like, what was he doing? Secret Wars or Kang Dynasty? Doesn't matter. I think he's going to do a good job. Let's go Shang-Chi on the great tier. I believe it's a great film. The Captain America trilogy. I don't have to talk for a long time about this because I have before, and I guess I'm going to do it again. Let's run through this. Let's see if you guys remember. The first Avenger, underrated. Great origin. It flies through some things. It montages its way through, but I believe it captures the time period extremely well, and I like Red Skull as a villain. Winter Soldier. I'm losing my voice. That'll get it going. Look at this. Sprite Wakanda Forever. Isn't that's cool. That's on theme. Not a sponsor. I wish, though. Hey, send in the money. Here we go. Give me a good payday. Sprite. Winter Soldier may be in the conversation for the best standalone superhero movie ever. Am I going to put it above Dark Knight or Logan? No, I'm not crazy. But it's in the conversation, okay? It's an incredible film that builds Captain America into a character that's way more interesting than First Avenger, even though I think he's great in First Avenger. That tells you how good this movie is. The Russo brothers' direction, and what I like about their direction is that it handles small-scale action better than anything you had seen in the MCU, and maybe better than anything other than like a Shang-Chi, right? It's that good. And the storyline with Bucky, I love a good friendship story. This is the ultimate superhero friendship story that carries through into Captain America Civil War. And Civil War is much bigger. It's like an Avengers movie. It has all of our characters, but it's a personal story for Cap. It's a personal story for Tony that culminates in the airport scene with all of these characters, introducing Black Panther and Spider-Man, and then it culminates with what I think the best fight scene is, and that's the scene at the end with all three of these characters. I know people love Silvestri, and I love Silvestri. I still think he's the GOAT of the MCU, but Henry Jackman's score in Winter Soldier and Civil War, absolutely phenomenal. He comes back for Falcon and the Winter Soldier, maybe the best part of that show. But I love the inclusion and introduction of Falcon. I love where these characters go in Civil War, and the fact that all of this trauma comes from this one idea, and the Russo brothers, they convey that beautifully. So let's go Captain America the First Avenger on the great tier, Captain America the Winter Soldier on the all-time tier, and Civil War right next to it. Three more. Here we go. Werewolf by Night, a really cool Marvel special. Do I call it a movie? I don't know anymore. I've done both. Michael Giacchino, I can't believe he directed this. And that's not a knock on him. I mean, he responded to my tweet, for goodness sakes. I'm so happy he directed this and integrated what he does best, the music, into something that, built up these characters, made them interesting, made it a cool experience, and captured this classic universal monster movie feel and this game of cat and mouse that they are playing in this movie is one that's interesting. And the fact that my biggest flaw, my biggest criticism is that it was too short. Like, I wanted more from these characters. My God, Man Thing, yeah, that's a good criticism to have. That's a good flaw. This not only was an entertaining time, an actual blast while watching, it's a great movie. It's a great thing. A short, whatever you call it. Black Panther and Black Panther Wakanda Forever. Now, I do believe the first Black Panther is, and I'm going to use this word, okay, overrated. Why is it overrated? Because it got nominated for Best Picture. I don't think it deserved it that year. When you look at some of the other movies, and when you also look at some of the other superhero movies that came out that year that were better than Black Panther. That being said, I do love the buildup in that film. I think Michael B. Jordan is excellent. The inclusion of Andy Serkis is awesome. Chadwick has every ounce of charisma that a leading man needs. And challenging the king for his throne and throwing in a character like M'Baku, who is outstanding, the camaraderie with his family, the idea of family, them visiting Wakanda, integrating Ludwig Göransson's score. It's all amazing. The third act is way more generic and conventional than the rest of the film, and I do believe it brings it down a notch or two. It brings it down to the point to where it could have been that Oscar player, but the third act, it features rubbery and ridiculous-looking CGI, and a fight that wasn't as compelling as the rest of the film. But, in my opinion, it's still a great experience. I'm going to put Black Panther on the great tier, and I think that's the word to use, experience. And that's kind of what Wakanda Forever is too, except I think the plot here is a little more in-depth, a little more fleshed out. I don't like the dialogue as much as the first movie, but there's a lot going on, maybe too much going on. That's the biggest fault I have with Wakanda Forever. But I can look past those flaws and get those emotional scenes that just grip you and hold you down and never let you go. I mean, my God, the emotions here are incredible. I truly believe this is going to have people crying. Like, my brother just got back from the theater just now, and he said, man, he's like, I got emotional again because he went to the premiere with me. He said his girlfriend got emotional, who has, had criticisms of this phase of the MCU for good reason. But this one worked for her, and this one is working for a lot of people. I'm seeing good responses for those who have watched it. Look, I just released my full review, so I won't go into much more detail, but Namor worked extremely well. Shuri was so much better than I expected. I was so hesitant for that side of the story, but she was great. The performances, man. Angela Bassett, my God, they're awesome. Didn't like the score as much as the first, but the visuals, 10 times better. The final action scene, 10 times better. The finale in general, I think, was much stronger than the first Black Panther. And the politics of it all, man. These two nations going up against each other. When we go back to the U.S., I'd say stop it. Let's go back to Wakanda. Let's go back to Namor underwater. But when we did, it worked so well. So, Wakanda Forever, great tier for me. All right, folks, you know what time it is. Let's start at the bottom and work our way up and give you a definitive ranking that will probably change at some point in the future. At the bottom here, we have Captain Marvel, my least favorite in the MCU, followed by, this is tough. I think because I've trash-talked it longer, I'm going to go Dark World below She-Hulk, but All three deserve to be on that tier. On the meh tier, Black Widow, Iron Man 2, and Hulk. Let's go Hulk at the bottom. I just don't know if that one holds up. Followed by Iron Man 2 and Black Widow or Black Middow on the meh or the mid tier. Let's just rename that. Let's just rename that for the heck of it. And that's what it is going forward. On the okay tier, let's go Ant-Man and the Wasp at the bottom, followed by What If, even though there are some great episodes in there. Next up, we've seen it drop just a little bit. It's going to drop even further now. Thor, Love, and Thunder, unfortunately. Followed by one of my bigger disappointing TV shows, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Then we have the Eternals, Miss Marvel, and Iron Man 3 at the top of the okay tier. On the good tier, let's go the first Thor at the bottom, even though, again, I think it may be underrated. Avengers Age of Ultron will be next, and then Moon Knight looks good right there. I do like Hawkeye just a bit more than Multiverse of Madness. I think Hawkeye just embraces what it is really, really well. On the great tier, oh, this is tough. I'm going to go Far From Home just because I do believe it is a step down from the first, so it's at the bottom of the great tier. Ant-Man will be next, underrated, but lower on this tier. The first Black Panther, oh man, this is a big change I'm making. I am moving the first Avenger up a couple of spots, and then followed by the brand new special, Werewolf by Night, just a massive surprise for me. Doctor Strange, the very first one, right after Werewolf by Night. And then, let's go Spider-Man Homecoming, just because I do genuinely believe that Wakanda Forever is a better film. Oh, wait a second, guys. I didn't realize Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 was there, so sorry, Volume 2. You may have been expecting me to put it higher. It is above Far From Home, though. But you know what's above all of that? Wakanda Forever and Shang Chi, the top of the great tier. On the awesome tier, let's go WandaVision at the bottom, mostly because of that finale. And this is going to shock some people. I want to go Loki above the first Avengers, just maybe a cooler experience. Then we have the first Iron Man, still an outstanding movie. Guardians of the Galaxy next, a huge surprise. And Spider-Man No Way Home, one of the coolest theater experiences of all time. But Thor Ragnarok, a movie that keeps getting better. On that tier, this is looking pretty good with Civil War at the bottom, but I am going to go Avengers Endgame next, and Captain America Winter Soldier in the 2 spot. And I made this change last time, I believe. Avengers Infinity War slightly above that. You are sick of me talking by this point. Let me throw in one more thing. If you're still here and you haven't dropped a like, it'd be awesome if you do that, man. Help the channel. Help me get to 140. That's the next goal, 140,000. I can't thank you guys enough for getting me to where we are right now. And we're not done talking about Marvel. I'm hoping to do a hero tier list at some point very soon. I'm also hoping to do a spoiler discussion for, what's the new movie? Black Panther Wakanda Forever. Okay, clearly I'm tired. I'm done. Leave your lists down below.